welcome to another booktube video from me, Lauren, from Lauren and the Books. Yes, I'm dressed like Anne Boleyn. Yes, there's an Anne Boleyn reading vlog coming up at some point. Today's video, though, nothing to do with Anne Boleyn, is me reacting to your favourite books. So I made a video where I reacted to your most hated books in April, and I had such a fun time sort of collecting everything, finding out, like making a little tally chart of all the books that you hated the most and then my reactions to them. I thought I'd do it for the books that you loved, so I did the same thing. I went on Instagram and I said, tell me your most favourite ever book, and I created a whole list of them. Now, in the same way that I'm only reacting to the ones that I've read, like I did in the most hated books, as I've previously said, I'm only going to react to the ones that I've read. However, it was a massive list. It was a massive, and like 2 pages worth, and a lot of these got more than 1 vote, which is in fact the ones I'm going to start with. So I'll start with, I mean, I should have put these in order of the ones that got the most votes, but as we go through, so I'll start with the ones that got the most votes, and then we'll move on to others. So Normal People was a book that was a favourite. I also think that Normal People by Sally Rooney was one of my favourite books as well. I remember getting the proof for it, and I remember reading it, and then subsequently all the sort of like hype and TV series and everything that's been around it. That sometimes cements a favourite for me, and I think I connected so much with the actors who represented Connell and Marianne in the BBC Three series that, having gone back and revisited it, and I listened to the audiobook of it, and it's a fantastic audio performance. I think it's Aoife McMahon who does it. Please correct me if I'm wrong on the audio, on the Audible ones, but I'm sure that's who it is. Does an amazing job, and I've since connected sort of like Connell and Marianne as the actors that play that. What are their names? Paul Mescal, he's a lovely thing, isn't he? And what's her name? What's her name? I really like her. I've literally just looked at a picture of her at the Met Gala ball. I don't know, but yeah, I very much agree with this, and a lot of people voted for it. Another book that I very much agree with and a lot of people voted for in terms of favourites is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. This is probably my favourite book. If people were to ask me what my favourite book is, I would probably say Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. This is a book that I came to sort of like late in my reading career. I only read it when I'd started BookTube, and you know, before BookTube, guys, I had a whole sort of 25 years of life before BookTube happened. But yeah, it's an amazing book, and every time I read it I get a little bit more from it, and I've read it, listened to the audiobook of it, and it's one of those books that I tend to revisit every year. Did I listen to it last year, or did I read it last year? Yes, I did, because didn't we read it from, no, that was the year before. So the last time I read it was in November 2020, because we read it for Patreon Book Club as part of my because it's my birthday month in November. I said, oh, let's read one of my favourites, and we read that. So that was the last time, so I'm probably due a reread of it, so maybe I will get round to doing that. But yeah, an absolutely amazing book. So much sort of like plot in there, which I wasn't expecting. It's a real sort of like page turner gripper, particularly sort of like the last third, but also so much sort of atmosphere, and the characters are really well done, and it's sort of very sort of dripping in like gothic creepiness. But yeah, like really love it. Another one, To Kill a Mockingbird. A lot of people said that was their favourite book. This is a book that I read, I think I might have read it before BookTube, and I don't remember much of it, but I'm mentioning it because so many of you read it. I remember reading Go Set a Watchman. No, I have read it since then, because Go Set a Watchman came out while I was doing BookTube, and I think I read To Kill a Mockingbird before that. Yeah, I enjoyed it, I think, but I don't think there's much in there that sort of kept me, like, it wouldn't be one of my favourites or mentionable. Another book, though, that I'm so pleased that some of you mentioned, because this is, you know, like when somebody mentions a book and you like, oh my god, I really love that book, and it's Behind the Scenes at the Museum by Kate Atkinson. Kate Atkinson is a brilliant author. Life After Life is another one of her books that I absolutely love, but Behind the Scenes at the Museum seems to be one that sort of flies under the radar a little bit. It doesn't get some mention, but it's so good. Kate Atkinson writes sort of families and epic sort of long tales of like different times and all sort of like a whole life so well. And Behind the Scenes at the Museum is one that I borrowed off of somebody that I work with. She doesn't work there anymore. One of the nurses I work with, her husband is also really into reading, and when I just started BookTube, he started watching my BookTube channel, and I remember he was collecting her from work once. We had this massive long chat about books, and he said, oh, you must read Behind the Scenes at the Museum by Kate Atkinson. So I borrowed it off of him and read it, and I loved it. So I must. I'm sure that's sort of the sort of book that would be be in charity shops and all about, but I must get myself a copy of that because it's a brilliant book. So if you've read other Kate Atkinsons and you've loved them, then please do try Behind the Scenes at the Museum. Another one that everybody loves, and as do I, is Anne of Green Gables. This is one that I came to not last year, the year before, I think. I actually have the whole series of, I'm pointing up there because that's where they live. David's sister was kind enough to buy me a beautiful sort of naked hardback series of all of the Anne of Green Gables books, and I've still only read the first one. I read the first one in my vintage edition, which has got beautiful artwork on the front and a vision of Anne with her lovely long red hair out behind her. But I've also listened to, so I read it first time in 2020. Last year I listened to it because I got an Audible narration, which is narrated by Rachel McAdams, and she does an amazing job. So yeah, maybe I'll listen to that again and then start with the rest of them. Oh, there's so much reading to do, but I love it. It's so heartwarming and so lovely, and Anne Shirley is just like the most adorable thing ever. I Capture the Castle. Now this is one I definitely want to revisit. I remember reading I Capture the Castle when I went up to Edinburgh to meet up with Jean and Brittany, who no longer makes videos, and I remember having it out from the library at the time. And I think I was maybe swept up in all of the sort of excitement of meeting up with booktubers and things like that. I don't really remember much about it. I remember I was sort of like picking it up in between, like really reading like little quick snippets of it. But I know it's like, when I hear people talk about it, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember reading that book, but I really think I would get more out of it if I was to read it now. So we'll definitely be revisiting that. And one that surprised me that got a lot of votes was Jane Eyre. So many people said that Jane Eyre was their favourite book. I reread Jane Eyre recently. I'd read it when I was at school because we studied Wide Sargasso Sea, which is also one that comes up as someone's favourite. Somebody voted for that as their favourite. We studied Wide Sargasso Sea for AS level English, maybe A level English. And as a prelude to that, we read Jane Eyre. So I'd read it when I was in school. And then I've got the beautiful naked cloth-bound classic edition. I'll be inserting pictures of all these books here, so I imagine that's the one I've inserted here. And owned that. It's a big old chunky thing, isn't it? I was surprised because I don't remember it being that big and chunky when I was at school. And read that for when I did June Eyre a couple of years ago. It wasn't last year. Last year I did Little Women. The year before that I did Pride and Prejudice. So yeah, coming up for 3 years ago, I most recently read Jane Eyre. I enjoyed it. I think I remember being surprised. I think I might even include it in my best books of the year that year because I was really surprised at how much I got from it. But yeah, I'd like to watch an adaptation of that and to remind myself of it. Yeah, I was surprised at how many people voted for it. Americana was one that got a lot of votes. Another Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie book that got a lot of votes was Half of a Yellow Sun. Americana was always one of my sort of like triangle of my favourite books ever. The one being Rebecca, another one being Americana, and another one being Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. However, due to recent events and recent views from both J.K. Rowling and sadly Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, I've sort of slipped those away because they were very much favourite books of mine at the time, but unfortunately I don't agree with the views of the authors that wrote them. It's very difficult, isn't it? And I always feel really nervous talking about this because people get really cross in the chat, in the comments. So I'm not inviting you to be cross in the comments. Maybe just going to scream into a pillow or something if you don't agree with me. But yeah, I've sort of taken those off of my radar. But yeah, Americana was one of my favourite books ever. Little Women was another one that got lots and lots of votes. Little Women is a book that I read last year for Little Women, and that film, the Greta Gerwig Little Women film, is probably my favourite film ever. I love it. It feels sort of like magical and Christmassy to me and wholesome, and even though there is peril in there, I feel like the peril is so sort of ingrained in culture so everyone knows the peril in Little Women that I'm prepared for it every time I go in. But yeah, I very much enjoyed that, and I enjoyed reading lots of adaptations of it last year as well. Another one that sort of fits in with the people I no longer want to really be associated with is The Heart's Invisible Furies by John Boyne. Now I loved The Heart's Invisible Furies, but yeah, more recently sort of shared a few views online that I'm not that glad about. And actually his last book that I read, what was it called? But I fucking hated it. Something at the Gates of Heaven or something? Something at the... Anyway, I absolutely hated it. So yeah, he's no longer my fave either. One of my faves though, Queenie by Candice Carty-Williams, that got a few votes as well. This is a book that I read a couple of years ago, and yeah, great. I remember reading it and thinking that that was the closest sort of closest I'd read to how my mental health had affected me, and like hearing about Queenie's struggles with her mental health. You're following Queenie, who works in publishing and is sort of like a young woman enjoying life and going out, but maybe seemingly not enjoying life because she's being fucked over by awful, horrible men. She's having problems with her mental health. And yeah, I think that sort of depiction of mental health is the closest I think I've ever read to how I felt about stuff. And I really appreciated it for that, but also for like the other side of things, like reading what it's like for a black woman to go through these experiences, and the sort of like assimilating and being familiar with the way she's treated by men and stuff like that. So yeah, I really, really love this book, and this is one that I've read and then listened to the audiobook of, and will continue to do so throughout my life. Do you know the book that got the most votes? Oh no, Rebecca was the one that got the most votes, but the second most votes for favourite book was The Secret History. And I'd sorted out my shelves recently and was getting rid of a copy of The Secret History, but so many people voted for it, and I remember reading it. I read it for my book club at work, and I think it's a really great book, and I'd love to revisit it. So I took it out of the bags of books that I'm getting rid of, and I am going to reread it, hopefully this year, just because so many people voted for it. So I thought, oh yeah, maybe I need to remind myself what the fuss was about, because I enjoyed it at the time. It's not one that I've read and thought, oh God, I'll never come back to that. Although I obviously did think that when I got rid of it. But yeah, it's made me think I'm going to revisit it. It's about a group of students, isn't it, studying classics, if I remember. And at the beginning, one of them, I think it opens with one of them dying, or one of them dying. And then you read them sort of how their group got together and what happened in this death and things like that. Yeah, I'm definitely going to revisit that. Yes, definitely. So thank you all for reminding me. Pride and Prejudice was another one that got lots and lots of votes, so very pleased to see that up there. I'm going to be doing next month, actually, Pride and Prejudice. No. June Austen. So I'm going to be reading some of the Jane Austen books that I haven't read before, and also revisiting some adaptations of some Jane Austen books as well. So I'm very much looking forward to that. The Time Traveller's Wife was one that got a lot of votes, and I haven't read that for a while. I think the last time I read that was maybe when I was a student. I remember very vividly sitting on the grass outside my student house in my first year and reading it, having bought it for like £2.99 in HMV or something like that, but very much enjoyed it. They've got a new series of it coming out, haven't they, with Rose Leslie and Theo James, is it, that plays the guy in there? I think there's a lot of, like, the people who said to me, oh, I love Time Traveller's Wife, a lot of people were like, oh, but also I sort of am ignoring the problematic moments in there, because the premise is that it's a love story about this guy who's a time traveller, but he meets his wife at different times in her life because he's a time traveller, and sometimes he meets her when she's a child, and there's like a sort of, not a romantic thing going on when she's a child, but it's very obvious that she is going to become his wife and things like that. Daughter of the Forest was one by Juliette Marillier, which is one that I read the first in the series of. The first in the series is called Daughter of the Forest, and it's about a woman, I think her name is Sorcha, if I remember. I really enjoyed reading it. It's massive. I got it out on Kindle, and I remember it's one of those books when you're reading on Kindle and you're pressing and pressing and pressing, like as in you're reading and you're like, this hasn't gone up a percentage for ages. And her brothers get her brothers get turned into geese, I think, or swans, and she has to break the curse in order to do that. And I really enjoyed it. It was very sort of like epic, lots going on, big amount of plot, for like very detailed, because it's a big book for like quite a small amount of time. And then there's like a second and a third book. I don't know if the second and the third maybe follow her daughter, but definitely she is involved in them as well. So I must, when I revisit that, maybe I'll listen to the audiobook of it and then start on the other ones. I'll have to see if it's available on Libby. Other ones that got more than one vote. Bridget Jones's Diary, another one of my favourites. We read that for Patreon Book Club for my birthday last year as a treat to me. Love it. Every time I read it, I find it funnier. Again, very problematic issues in there with sort of weight and the way she's treated by men. But I feel like I forgive it, is what I'm trying to say, because I feel like I was Bridget then, and now my views on those sort of things have completely changed. So I would have been writing, oh, I need to lose this amount of weight, and like that was me then. And I feel like I've grown so much as a person since I've read them, both width-wise and inside. And I think Bridget would have done as well. That's why when I read it, those views don't bother me, whereas they would when I read them in other books, because I feel so at one with Bridget. I really feel like there's elements of her in me and elements of me in her that I feel like that's grown. But yeah, a brilliant book, so funny, find it so funny every time. Then Fingersmith, which is my favourite book from last year. Absolutely loved it, by Sarah Waters. Really looking forward to reading Affinity of hers this year. Yeah, brilliant book. And her she writes sort of like big historical fiction novels, like recent history, and she's just the research she does is just second to none. Absolutely amazing. The audiobook of it was fantastic. My mum since listened to it and said it's brilliant as well. Yeah, really love it. The Bell Jar, there was quite a few votes for that as well. I read that when I was at university. In my first year, I did sociology and social policy at university. The story of me going to university is that I went to a grammar school, and they were like, so what are you going to do at university? They never really like entertained an option that you wouldn't go to university. And because my grades were only good in sort of sociology and social policy, they were like, oh, why don't you go and do sociology? So I didn't get to study English at university because I didn't like because I wasn't good enough at it when I did it at A-level, and also like I didn't investigate any other sort of like avenues because the school weren't really keen to help you out with that. So I ended up doing sociology at university, and in my first year you could take sort of like other modules in other departments, and I took an English literature module, and we read The Bell Jar, and I absolutely loved it. Well, loved the reading experience of it. It felt really grown up, and I remember reading it in, it's very troubling, there's lots of like mental health stuff in there. I remember reading it in the library, I remember reading it on the bus. I remember, like, when I think of that book, it reminds me of my first year at university. Lord of the Rings was another series that got a lot of votes. I don't think I've read all of the Lord of the Rings. I've definitely read The Hobbit, and I've definitely read the first one. My dad had sort of like paperback copies, which I gradually borrowed over the years and then never returned, in like a little book, like a little sleeve that held them all. I don't think I ever read Return of the King. I remember there being like surprised by how much more there is. Like, you think those films are epic and include a lot. There's so much in those books that aren't included. So yeah, they appeared as well. Then The Five, which is a non-fiction book about and I've talked about it recently because I've read a book about a fiction book about a similar thing, about the 5 women who were killed by Jack the Ripper, and their lives up until that point. So they're not just sort of names on a page, or sometimes not even names, sometimes just you're told they're prostitutes. So yeah, very much enjoyed that book. Really good. Listen to the audio of it. I actually own it now. And then The Mercies, which is another one of my favourite books by Kieran Millward Hargraves, which I read a few years ago. This is about an island in, I want to say Denmark, but it might be Norway. It also might be Iceland. And during a sort of freak fishing accident, all of the men from the village end up dying, and it's a village that is now run by women. And they get somebody from the church to come in. It's very sort of like stark and bleak, but with moments of like, well, there's one of the sexiest sort of like flatbread baking scenes I've ever read in a book ever, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. I'd like to revisit that actually. Maybe I saw that was on Libby, the audiobook. Maybe I'll get that out and revisit that. 84 Charing Cross Road was another one that I recently got. It's by Helen Hanff, and it's epistolary novel, love that word, told between the owner of a bookshop and somebody, and them trying to get books. It's lovely. It's so lovely. So those are all the ones that scored more than one. Now I'm going to deep dive into a few more ones that I wanted to mention. Noughts and Crosses by Mallory Blackman was somebody's favourite. That was also, like, I love that book, and I love the series. I can never remember how far I've got with the series, but I need to revisit it. I remember reading it and being like, and it sort of opening my eyes to a lot of stuff when I was younger. It's a YA book about noughts and crosses, and it's sort of like done a sort of like where you do a gender swap, but almost like a race swap. Would that happen? Where like black people, excuse me, I've got a really tickly throat. Black people are thriving in society and sort of like got the top jobs, and all the people, and the white people are the more sort of working class people, worker servants for these people. So yeah, is it called a race swap? Is that what they call? I've never heard that term before, but like in the way that you do like a gender flip or a gender swap. Really amazing set of books, and very much enjoyed. What else I want to mention? Girl, Women, Other, which is another book that I've read and loved. Read the book and listened to the audio of. Really enjoyed that. None of these books, when people were mentioning them, I was like, oh, I hate that book. All of the, oh, actually, saying that, there was one that I didn't get on with, but somebody mentioned, and I know this is very revered. Open Water. I read that last year on audio, and I didn't get on with that very much. Oh, Station 11 I wanted to mention, and I had, actually, I should have put a little star next to that, because that got more than one vote. Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. I read that when I just first started BookTube. They've recently made a series of it, haven't they? With Himnish Patel in it, and I must watch that because I remember very much enjoying it. It's a pandemic novel. Oh, someone at the door. Oh, sorry about that. It was Miss Sister. This is going out after Miss Sister's birthday. It was Miss Sister's. I bought her a silk pillowcase for her birthday. So that's what that was. And it's arrived. So it looks lovely. Made me want a silk pillowcase for my birthday. Where did we get to? Other ones. Oh, My Sister the Serial Killer was another one that came up. This was on the Women's Prize long list. Maybe on the shortlist a few years ago, and I read that. I enjoyed it. It's definitely not one of my favourites, but I enjoyed it very much. Never Let Me Go, which is one that David and I read this year, and it is a from Kazuo Ishiguro. We read it aloud to one another in January, and we really enjoyed it. I'd read it before, but I thought I wanted a book that sort of unfurled and like David would get like be keen to read them on. And I don't think it's like, it's not a page turn or anything, but there's a lot going on there, and there's a lot of sort of like stuff going on below the surface. Homegoing by Yard Jessie, that appeared as well. I'm just going to sort of blitz through some of these last ones. An American Marriage, which was one of my favourites, again on the Women's Prize long list not so long ago. The Girl with the Loud in Voice. So actually, yeah, I have got two that I wasn't mad on. The Girl with the Loud in Voice, I had such high hopes for, and I listened to the audiobook of it. My colleague had read it. I'd heard about other people that had read it. David's mum had bought it for me for Christmas. And yeah, I just didn't get on with it at all. I think maybe because of the audio. And then the other one that I didn't love was The Alchemist. Read this for book club at work many years ago. And I remember we picked it for Christmas because the person who was in book club said, oh, it's got sort of like a Christmassy vibe around it. I do not feel like this book has a Christmassy vibe. It's very sort of pretentious. These, strangely, a lot of these books appeared on both the most hated and most loved books. This was one that appeared on the most hated as well. As did Rebecca, as did, what was another one that appeared? Oh, Wuthering Heights, I think, which also appeared on this as well. So yeah, there we go. There's some books that you guys, that's me reacting to some of your favourite books. Shall I whip through a few more? Oh, one that appeared, His Dark Materials, absolutely love that. The Lovely Bones, which is a book I read when I was younger. Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society. The Great Gatsby, which I've read this month. Matilda, The Essex Serpent, they're making that into a series, aren't they? Tin Man, The Trouble with Goats and Sheep, Hamnet, Wuthering Heights, as I said, 1984. The Hostage, The Martian, A Thousand Splendid Suns, Educated, Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, The Nightingale. The Nightingale was the book my nan was reading when she died, so I always, whenever I read that, I always think, oh. Perks of Being a Wallflower, Stardust, Asking for It, Paying Guests, another Sarah Waters book. Circe, Elmet, I Am, Where the Crawdads Sing, which was another one I didn't love that much. So there we go. That is me reacting to some of your favourite books. I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know if any of these books were your favourite. Let me know what your favourite book, if I haven't mentioned it and you submitted it, it's probably because I haven't read it before. So do let us know down below, because I'd love to read through lists and lists of people's favourite books. And I'll see you all again soon for another BookTube video. Goodbye!